If you're like me, you probably grew up listening to a lot of heavy metal, industrial, and alternative rock when you were in high school. And I always loved the sound of the overdrive on the guitar. So let's create that. First, I'm going to unlock my patch from before, and I'm going to get rid of this reverb. I'm going to change this sends to something a little bit different. How about O out or oot? Kind of sounds like I'm doing oral skills all of a sudden. That was a terrible joke, but c'est la vie. Okay, now with this, I'm going to use a really, really simple object, but I'm going to create some more space before I do that just to move all of my sliders so I've got a little bit of room, and we'll take this down just a bit. So the object that I'm going to use is Overdrive, and Overdrive is soft clipping signal saturation. I'm going to use that with a argument of 1. If I take a look at the help file, this tells me that it does distortion of audio signals. It gives it just a nice kind of pseudo tube-based type sound. 1 is no overdrive. That's why I'm specifying that as my initial value. You can get some really funky values here. So what I like to do with this to get anything from, moderate overdrive to really screaming overdrive is to have 2 of them. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to chain them together exactly like this. Then I'm going to have them go into a signal multiplier, which I'm going to use as an amplifier. And that's going to be important because the last thing I want this to do is to blow up in my face. And let's face it, it very well could. Let's align this just to get it out of the way. And then I will show you how to do this. So the overdrive, as I said, it has anywhere from 1 to larger. 1, however, is off. And that will control how much clipping is used. So I'm going to take this live.slider, go to the inspector, and I am going to give it a range that is slightly different. Let's do 1 point, and then we're going to take it up to 10 point and connect it up. I'll duplicate it, and this one, however, is going to go into my second one. So I'm going to go from 1 here to 100, which will create a really excessive amount of overdrive. Then, just to keep that distortion manageable, I'm going to throw in a 0 to 1 multiplier that's going to effectively function as an amplifier. And connect that up here. Dry wet is still set, as always. And so if I were to put this in, turn everything to 1 and set dry, there's good old Anton. If I bring dry wet up and it's still at 1 for both of the values going into overdrive, you'll notice that it got a little bit quieter. And at full volume, it's even quieter. I have to bring that amp up. Now, the reason for that is that with overdrive, with just the sheer amount of clipping distortion that you're going to hear, it can be perceptually louder than the signal actually is. So I like to throw that in there just as a way to manage things. It's not 100% necessary. You could do it without, but it's personal preference. So I'm going to loop Anton, and then let's hear it as I bring in the distortion. Now, you hear how that's getting just so unbelievably loud? It's actually not getting any louder on the decibel side, but perceptually it is, because that's how the distortion works. It's clipping, and you're interpreting that as being hitting that threshold. But you can take a look at it by running it through a VU meter or just a regular meter. Oh, and not a message. And you can see what it's receiving. Let's make that nice and big. That we are getting louder. We're eventually, when I throw it fully over the distortion with the full amplification, we do clip, but it's a very slight amount of decibel difference. It's just getting perceptually louder. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind with the overdrive in particular. And I find that the overdrive, you're probably going to want to pair this up with a compressor just to kind of keep things down in an area where you can manage them. And a really easy way to do that is to just use Omx.comp, which is a Octamax compressor, and it has a ton of options, but just using the default ones can help. And you can hear that by using the bypass message. And if you take a look at advanced, it's got tons of stuff like auto gain control, attack, release, decay, range ratio, all sorts of stuff, which I'll leave you to play with on your own. But here is our signal with that compressor, and let's bring the meter back. Coming out of the compressor, and let's compare that to before the compressor. So it's interesting that it's keeping the volume the same. It is going up to the clipping level because I didn't really play with any of the values going into there, but it's a good thing to play with, to know about and to use in your own compositions. But again, I will let you figure out how to use that best because compression really is an art form more than anything else.